I kind of forget I'm on camera. So I don't have time for this.
I was gonna say, just keep going. Just blow right through. We're already in this room. We already messed up the.
Welcome in to DNVR Avalanche at the Rink podcast. Meghan, Angley, Jesse Montano. How was your Easter?
It was good. It was very nice. We had everyone together. It was actually, in terms of like getting your family together for holidays, it went pretty smooth.
Good.
My family's very, very close. We grew up really close. I love my siblings, my two older sisters, my parents, but I remember I never used to understand when I was a kid, people would say, oh, the holidays are so stressful. Because my family, we moved here when I was 2 years old. My dad got relocated. So we didn't grow up near any extended family. When I was real little, we'd make trips back for certain things. I remember we'd go back for New Year's a lot. But so it was always just like the five of us, and it was all so fun and all that stuff. So I never understood why people thought holidays are stressful. Well, I've gotten older now. My two older sisters each have families of their own, kids. You know, obviously I'm married now. My parents, in-laws, and all that stuff. And I get it. I get it now. Holidays are just so stressful. I just like sit out in the car before I go in, like, okay, here we go. 4 hours. Like, we can do this. Because family knows how to push your buttons in ways that nobody else on Earth
they've had a lifetime to
possibly
figure it
could.
out.
Right. So normally family events, while great to see everybody, and I love everyone, are normally very stressful. Yesterday was actually just kind of like a nice, kind of quiet day, and everyone was in a good mood, and no babies were screaming, and good food and nice weather and all of that stuff. So that was a really long-winded way of saying I had a great Easter. How was your Easter?
It was good. I honestly...
Down in the Springs?
No, I stayed up here and just did game stuff. Like, I just got ready for that.
Duh.
I could have probably built something in advance, honestly, if I had timed it right, because it was a late enough start that it was maybe possible. Did you get a chance to watch the game, though?
I did, yes. So that was actually, and thank you for bringing this up. Thank you, guys, because that was one of my favorite parts yesterday. Right as everything was winding down was really kind of like the end of the first period, so I've been watching it just kind of on my computer. But then everyone left, and I got to just kind of sit there and watch the rest of the game with my parents, which was just nice to do, because doing what we do, we don't get a lot of that stuff where you just get to kind of casually watch the game with friends, family, things like that. So obviously my parents had a huge influence on me being into hockey and being where I'm at now, and countless hours of hockey tournaments and sitting at rinks and early mornings and things like that. So whenever I get the chance to just sit down and watch hockey with them, it's always fun. So that was one of my favorite parts of the day.
It has been a long time since I've been just a spectator of Avalanche hockey specifically. But I think it was an interesting road trip too. In ways, it's a perfect road trip, but you see two ugly wins at the tail end of it that happen very differently from each other too. I think they're definitely not.
I thought that was it. I was waiting for the crunch out there. I thought that was that car was coming.
We've
in
yet
hot.
to have an ambulance drive by too.
We have yet to have an ambulance, but that car was coming in hot, and the guy in front of him was not moving. I thought that was about to be it. Be our first car crash live on air. Sorry, I fully interrupted you.
No, it's okay. I wanted to get away from talking about the games specifically too. I'm sure we'll have plenty of time in our pods this week to unpack some of those games too.
Yeah.
Unless there was something you wanted to say about them.
I was just going to say, that game yesterday, I was telling my parents, I said, oof, I'm happy I'm not going to have to analyze or break this one down. But really, Meghan, and again, this is just, this is where I've been at now for the last couple weeks. To me, I look at that as a 4-0 road trip. Last night, you're playing without Gabe Landeskog, Arturi Lehkonen, Darren Helm, Cale Makar, Bowen Byram, Josh Manson. You're at the last game of a 4-game trip. Yes, it's against the Ducks, but most people would normally look at that and say, it's the last game. You're 3-0. This is kind of a freebie throwaway game. I am looking at these last couple games here, and even that first one against the Sharks, saying this is an incredibly depleted team. They're finding ways to scratch out wins here. You got 3 games to go, and you've done everything you've needed to this point in terms of holding serve, continuing to move up the standings, put yourself in a good spot to win the division. They're ugly. I know, like you said, we'll get, I'm sure, into them this week and stuff like that. But I know people will look at those and want to nitpick them. But I really just do look at it and say, you pulled 8 out of 8 on a 4-game road trip, which saw one very good team in LA. With as depleted of a roster as you've got, if I'm being truthful about this road trip for the Avs, I don't know how you could be much happier.
Definitely. And on it too, a lot of milestones are unlocked that we are definitely going to get to. But I wanted to open the show with the news that you had from the PHWA. Yeah.
So no, it was exciting because we had kind of been sitting on this information now for a week and a half, 10 days, whatever. But Andrew Cogliano will be the Colorado Avalanche nominee for the NHL's Bill Masterson award, and I'm gonna pull up the exact
verbiage.
Yeah, verbiage on the award because it was just so funny when I was reading it. The first name that came to my mind was Andrew Cogliano. Nominees should be determined on the following criteria. A club player that best exemplifies qualities of perseverance, sportsmanship, and dedication to ice hockey. Last year it was Jack Johnson was our nominee for the Colorado chapter of the PHWA, which we all talked about. We were talking about it this year. That was such a great pick because he had the opportunity to hang it up. He hits 1,000 games. He had the great kind of speech before the 1,000 game mark. We thought it was such a nice pick. This one for us this year was, this guy comes in last year as a trade deadline pickup. We've all heard the story about the Game 6 speech during the Stanley Cup final. With the way the injuries have gone this year, he is just sifted to the top as such a leader in that room. I mean, Meghan, you see him around Ball Arena. Dedication to ice hockey. I don't know if I can ever imagine someone else that exemplifies that more than Andrew Cogliano. He's always the last dude out of the building. Most of the guys are leaving, going home to take their pregame naps, and he's running sprints in the hallway. He's just, I've been extremely impressed with him, getting to know him now over the last year. Is always willing to talk, always has something to say, and he's always honest. It's just been really impressive to see a guy like that up close and really go from trade deadline acquisition to key leader on a Stanley Cup contender, a defending Stanley Cup champion. And I mean, we joke all the time, talk about perseverance. He has to be made out of 70% carbon fiber or something like that. I've just never seen someone sustain what look like so many bad injuries and just bounce right back like nothing happened.
You've definitely seen him take even just tumbles in practice, and he just resumes as if nothing happened. In game, we watch it happen too. Yeah. I've learned not to panic immediately when it comes to Andrew Cogliano because of this quality in himself. And when Bednar talks about how well the players take care of themselves away from the rink and how that's embedded in this team's culture, he's somebody that comes to mind because of his commitment beyond what is expected of him as a professional athlete, which is high. That's high for all of the Avalanche players. But you see he takes it a step further in the extra time that he puts into his conditioning. And I think it's why he's able to dress for 77 of these games all this year. Yep. At 35 years old, hits the 1,200 mark for a reason, but having some of the best production he's had since he was in the 2018 season many years ago, in part because of what Colorado provides him as well. But when the Avs decided to re-up both Helm and Cogliano, I know there was some criticism for why both of these players are brought back. And that's sort of a conversation for a different day. Sure. But the reason for Cogliano being here feels pretty apparent. I know people can dog on him for the unnecessary penalties that he's racked up this season at points. I still wouldn't categorize him as an undisciplined player. He does play that way, though, that does sometimes tie up sticks and get involved with guys in a way that puts him in the penalty box. But for that reason, I don't think, it comes as a huge mark. It's hard on the heels of kind of a controversial weekend, but you have to set that aside in the context of the entirety of this season. And even if you remove what he did in the Stanley Cup playoffs, because that's a guy who was also fighting through a pretty brutal hand injury.
Broken hand.
And leading his group in the process. Yeah. Because when you ask anyone in the room about the leadership group, his name is always comes up, even through this season. And I think that's just something you can't pay too much for. Well, you can't absolutely pay too much for that.
I know what you mean, though. I know what you mean. It's hard to put a price on
when
that.
you reflect on the offseason move to keep Andrew Cogliano here, that's the reason why.
Right. There's two things that you said there, and one is the leadership thing that you're talking about right now, because I do find it so interesting when we talk to guys, and obviously we never who are the leaders? That's never the question. But whenever the conversation of leadership comes up, what's always striking to me is, Nate, Mikko, Kale, Gabe's around, Cogliano. Like, one of those players is very different from the other four. The other four of those guys, they're top of the lineup guys. They're bona fide superstars. Nathan MacKinnon, Cale Makar are, depending on the day, sometimes considered the best player on earth. Things like that. And it never, Andrew Cogliano never goes without getting his name mentioned in with that group. And I just think that that's not nothing, because it's really easy to just kind of default to the best players. How could you not listen to what Cale Makar has to say? But the fact that people have that much respect for Andrew Cogliano and his voice and his role in the room. And then your comment about you've learned not to panic when it's Cogliano. Last week, he left the bench. He went down the tunnel and he was kind of limping. And when he was limping off the ice, we all kind of talk in the press, like, oh, who's that? Who's that? And I remember he went down the tunnel and someone goes, I think it was Bolding, said, oh, it's Andrew, it's Cogliano. And all of us were like, oh, it's Cogs. All right, never mind. False alarm. Just keep an eye on the tunnel when he comes back. Sure enough, it was like 4 or 5 minutes later, here he comes back down the tunnel. So it really has, like, even amongst media, with this, even with the way this season has gone, where we assume everything is a 6 to 8 week injury, Cogs goes down the tunnel and we're all like, oh, never mind. Just go back to focusing on the game. He'll be back.
I think that's actually a great point just before the durability of Cogliano, but the fact that in the leadership group, who among them hasn't played 3+ seasons with the Avalanche? It's Cogliano, and who else?
It's Cogs, that's it.
He's a new-ish face to this group, but emerged as a really pivotal piece in their leadership, and I think that's a testament to what he brings to the table, too, because other voices have been a part of this group for longer periods of time and have established that. But for him to come in as a newer face and integrate in that way and have that kind of impact is also really impressive, and probably just a reflection of Cogliano's character.
100%. Again, you Jared Bednar talked about him and Arturi Lehkonen and Josh Manson at the beginning of this year being new players.
Right.
Because obviously we had them. Yes, their names are on the cup, but we're getting our first training camp with them and how they prepared in the summer. So to your point, he referred to them as new players. And I take it even back a step further. Not only has he been able to jump in and integrate himself in this way to this point, but again, Meghan, he's a trade deadline piece. And we've heard all those players say, like, yeah, his speech brought tears to my eyes. Like, that was 8 weeks after he showed up in town, and he's calling a meeting saying, we need to get our heads right. I feel comfortable enough to communicate with this room. I think I know what this room needs. And it struck all the right chords. They played a near perfect game in Game 6. And it's that, to me, was where I was like, okay, I get this guy. Like, I get why. Because even at the time when they brought him in, there were some question marks amongst Avs fans. Like, why add Andrew Cogliano? He's past, his goal-scoring prime. And you see why. And all the reasons why are why he's the Avs Bill Masterton nominee.
I love to hear, too, that Nathan MacKinnon was an advocate for Cogliano specifically coming to Colorado. Mm-hmm. I think that just kind of stands alone when it comes to his fit here as well.
They're both insane competitors. I actually think you and I were talking just a couple weeks ago because the two of them were skating around for before morning skate was officially getting going. Nate and Cogs were just kind of, cruising around the ice. And I said to you, I was like, I'd love to know what those two are talking about. Obviously, there's always chatter on the ice, like, oh, I'd love to know what they're saying, in the moment.
Definitely.
But like those two in particular, in that moment where it's like just two of the most hyper competitive people I've ever, been around, and just the way that they're dedicated to the game and their craft and things like that. Like, gosh, I'd love to know what a conversation between Andrew Cogliano and Nathan MacKinnon sounds like just casually.
I definitely would too. And this actually tees us up for the next topic really well, because when we talk about new additions to the team this year, guys that are playing a full season this year, among them, perhaps one of the most important, if not the, is Alexander Georgiev.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to talk about when it comes to the season that he's having. I think a couple things stood out to me, though. I don't want to get ahead of myself too with the audio, but let's just put it into perspective here. So okay. he just earned his 38th win of the season. He's tied for the third most wins in franchise history. So who do you think also has more wins?
It's got to be, it's got to be Varley and Waugh.
Is Varley and Waugh.
Okay, yeah.
And honestly, so 41 and 40 is the magic number there. So
okay, yep.
Depending on where
Varley's one, right?
Yeah, so Varley's 41. Waugh 40, and Georgiev's at 38. Mm-hmm. So that's a pretty impressive season for a goaltender who hadn't been a starter before coming to Colorado. And even presently, where he ranks in the NHL among goaltenders, second in the league in wins behind the impossibly good Boston Bruins Linus Ullmark. But beyond just that, too, of the top three goalies in wins, the other is Shesterkin. Mm-hmm. Georgiev has faced or has had to make the most saves. When you look at the depleted D-core that's been in front of him, that definitely adds some context as to why this feat as a first-time starter is also especially impressive. He's at a .919 save percentage, but his high danger save percentage is tied for third in the league for goalies who've played 40-plus games. And I just wanted to add that context for what Georgiev has been able to do this season. You could probably also qualify that even more from your perspective, what that has meant to the Colorado Avalanche.
Well, I was just going to say, and that's the part to me that I think maybe we as a whole, Avs media and even Avs, fans and things that we've maybe overlooked a bit. We've talked a lot about, wow, it's impressive that the Avs are sitting. We have talked about, wow, it's impressive the Avs are sitting where they're sitting, given the way that this season has gone. Look, I know fans this hasn't been as fun of a season as it was last year or even the year before when they won the President's Trophy. Like, I get it. It hasn't been as smooth sailing. There's been some ugly moments. There's been some tough losses. We've seen longer losing streaks this season than we've seen from the Avs in several years. It hasn't been as pretty, especially coming off the heels of such a dominant run last year. I get why people can feel down. I get it. I don't think it's justified. I think where the Avs sitting at the top of the stuff, free and clear, Meghan, it is April 10th. And the Colorado Avalanche are free and clear at the top of the Central Division. Not tied, not, oh, well, they're holding this tiebreaker. Oh, well, they've got games. No, they are alone, number one in the Central Division. It's incredibly impressive. It's incredibly impressive. It's a huge testament to a guy like Mikko Rantanen. It's a huge testament to Jared Bednar. It's a huge testament to Mikko Rantanen, Nathan MacKinnon in this back half. But maybe more than any of that. And again, this is where it's on us for maybe not putting enough emphasis on this. Maybe more than any of those other guys, as much as it is a testament to what a season they've had, Alexander Georgiev, if not for this guy, I really don't know. I think the Avs are still in the playoffs, but I think they're probably closer to that Seattle Kraken point total where they would have just clinched a night or two ago. You're solidified in that third wild card spot. You're going out on the road first round. Alexander Georgiev has been nothing short of spectacular for the Avs this year. He's not been Connor Hellebuck. He's not, like you said, Linus Ullmark has had an unbelievable season. But Alexander Georgiev has been outstanding. He's been healthy. He's been consistent. When he's had little dips in his play, he's bounced back really strong. He's been just an overwhelmingly steadying presence on the back end for the Avs. You can put his numbers up against almost anyone in the league. Almost anyone. Ullmark gets away with wins, but I mean, statistically, in a lot of other categories, Alexander Georgiev is right there. He's been huge for this team. He's been everything that they needed him to be, given the way this season has gone. Franchise record holder, 19 wins away from Ball. I guess it's up to 21 wins now away from Ball Arena. That's an unbelievably impressive number. He won over half their games on the road. Alexander Georgiev was in net for a win more than half the Avs games on the road this year. That's ridiculous when you kind of put that into perspective. He has been huge for this team in getting them to where they're at right now. He's had multiple games that he's kind of stolen, helped them get away with. And what I love about him is he's got that old Semyon Varlamov thing. He might give up 2, and you may not like one of them. But Alexander Georgiev consistently this year has said, cool, no more. I'm shutting the door here. That one was on me. That's my bad. I've got the next big save, and he's made big saves when the Avs have needed them. Late in games, to keep the game tied within reach or to keep the team in the lead. Alexander Georgiev has been huge for the Avs this year. When the team defense and just the D-core, to your point, Meghan, just hasn't been what A, we think it will be or can be, and B, he played a lot of this season behind a team that was made up of anywhere from 30 to 50% AHLers, and found a way to scrape out a lot of wins, 3 shy of the franchise record. If you would have just said at the beginning of the year, Alexander Georgiev will be pushing, I don't think it's going to be impossible for him to break it. He physically can't. There's not enough games left. If you told everyone at the beginning of the year, Alexander Georgiev, probably the biggest question mark for this team, will be pushing the franchise record for wins, I don't think anybody would care. I think most people would have assumed, oh, the Avs had another dominant season. But I think you would have been happy with that number. That when you take a look at the context that, no, he did a lot of that heavy lifting himself. And if it's not for him, he's not approaching this number. I don't know how you're not just over the moon with that for a guy that, like you said, this is his first time as a starter. He lost the job in New York before he really ever even got a chance. And I just don't think you could be feeling better, really, regardless of how the next 2 months plays out. I don't think you could be feeling any better about that move from last summer and the contract you got Alexander Georgiev on. I think Joe Sakic, Jared Bednar, Chris McFarland are kind of sitting there, UC Parkala, smacking high fives like, cool, we got our guy. It took us a lot of, let's try this guy, this guy, this guy. We got our guy. He's young. He's heading into his prime. He's cost controlled, and he's under contract for a number of years here. Nice job, team.
I think, too, there are teams right now that don't know what it feels like to have a true starter in that. And they're still managing success, but it is through a goalie tandem, the workload being shared, and providing just good goaltending. Mm-hmm. And that also relies on then the team in front of them being high-octane offense or shutdown defense. But in the case of the Avs, when you put the context of the man games lost, which is probably still second worst of all teams, mm-hmm. even counting today.
Yep. I think it is. I think they're number 2.
And the only other team worse than that is Montreal, which has had an abysmal season. But you look at where Georgiev ranks in the goaltender conversation among the Hellebucks, Andrei Vasilevsky, Shesterkin, Ullmark. It's not just that, he belongs in that conversation because we put him there. He put himself there through his numbers and the performance that he has had this 100%. Season. And I think that's important when you give context to it, too, because Linus Ullmark has not had to play in net behind a struggling Boston Bruins team.
Right.
And he's earned the credit that he deserves, too. But I think people can get spoiled in terms of goaltending in Colorado because we've had excellent goaltenders come through that emerge as true starters that perhaps we just don't really recall what it's... I mean, we've had injuries that have cropped up that have changed the goaltending situation that I think people can definitely reflect on. But other than that, I look back at this offseason and I think back on how at the time, I even wrote at the beginning of the year how this felt like a gamble with Georgiev and net.
Yep.
And it was a calculated risk, but it felt like a little bit of a risk. But the other day, Jared Bednar said...
I agree I agree fully, by the way.
He's what we'd hope for. You know, what you hope for isn't always what you get. So I'd say we're really pleased with what he's done this season. I thought that was really interesting because it's not, oh, he's played beyond expectation. This is exactly what Joe Sakic, Chris McFarland thought he was going to be, presumably. And some of that is born through their trust in UC Parkala and what he's been able to do with other starting goaltenders here in Colorado.
Does UC Parkala deserve for just the work he's done with them?
A lot, I think, because there can be differences, like in where your game is when you come in, the way he sees it, being able to have the communication with those guys and honest communication about what they feel their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, what he likes about their game, what he doesn't like, and vice versa for themselves in analyzing their own game, where they want to improve, where we feel they need to improve, and then they got to go to work on it. So I think it's a big process. Obviously, they're the last line of defense, so they're always going to be under a microscope. I think part of the reason, you know, some of these goalies have come in and had career years here is because of the guys in front of them, though, and the way they play and the structure of our game and our commitment to defend. So I think the version of Gorgie that we're seeing right now is what we'd hoped for. You know, what you hope for isn't always what you get. So I would say we're really pleased with what he's done to this point in the season.
You've talked a lot about Parkala before, but it's something at the beginning of the year we were able to talk about in sort of a prediction sense. Like, we think this is the effect that Parkala is going to have on Georgiev, but now we could sort of see it realized.
Yeah, so you made a lot of good points there. I'm trying to keep them all mentally straight. I before I answer that, I do want to talk about one thing that I've just been kind of keeping a loose eye on all year, and it's the Georgiev versus Shesterkin angle to all of this. Because you just won't convince me after the reaction that Georgiev gave in the game in New York at Madison Square Garden. You just won't convince me that when he got traded, that wasn't something in his mind. Like, I want to prove the Rangers wrong. I want to prove that I was the guy all along sitting there, and they made the mistake by, anointing Igor Shesterkin before me. And when you go through all of his numbers, like, Georgiev's had the better year. Pretty much in every category, he has been the better goalie than Igor Shesterkin all year. And I think that means something to him, and I just think it's been so interesting when you compare him up against other elite goalies. I think that's the one he cares about, and I think for at least this year, the 2022-2023 season, it goes to Georgiev. Now, Parkala, it's impossible to not look at him and say he's had an effect on these guys, right? Varlamov, Grubauer, Francouz, I think you can throw into that.
Definitely.
Kemper, and now Georgiev have all gotten to Colorado and have all just done this. Whether it be for one season, Darcy Kemper, or for their tenure here, all those other guys that I've listed, their game has just gone to another level. And I think it's hard to not look at UC Parkala and say, he's got a hand in this. He's got the magic touch with some of these goalies that he's able to get them to another level. And I think while that is true, I think we hear really high praise from guys about UC Parkala and his ability to communicate and knowing what they need. That's something Frankie has talked about with me a lot, or several times with relative to UC Parkala, is he knows what we need. He knows what I need. He can see, where I'm not doing this or where I'm overcommitting that. Need to seal this off better. Like, he talks about having a good eye for that. But I am starting to wonder if more than anything else, Meghan, and it's because of a comment that Jared Bednar made last week about, yes, goalies come in and have a good, they have career years, but they're also playing behind what we think is really structured defense and really committed team defense and protecting the house and things like that. I'm almost starting to wonder if UC Parkala has a way, And I don't know, maybe there's going to be someone that hears me say this and they roll their eyes and think, what an idiot. This guy has no idea what he's talking about. But like, I almost wonder if he's coaching them like into the system. You know what I mean? Where it's almost like, I'm teaching you to make these reads when the puck's coming from, your glove side corner below the goal line. I want you to make this read because our system is intended to influence the puck this way. Because it's getting to a point where it's like, well, you're just churning out these goalies. You're doing something. There's something, and it's not just he's a good coach. Like, there's something he's coaching into these goaltenders' games that is taking them to another level. And you could even argue that you look at Philip Grubauer, well, as soon as he left, the wheels have just come off. He was, a Vezina finalist, Vezina runner-up his last year in Colorado. And he's been terrible for 2 years in Seattle. So there's something that UC Parklow is doing, and I'm starting to wonder, is he almost kind of coaching these goaltenders to fit into this system and play behind this scheme, knowing where these are going to be our strong suits. This is where our system is intended to move the puck. And again, I don't know, maybe that's ridiculous because it's hard to coach goaltending into that, but there's got to be something because he has had such a pronounced impact on every goaltender that's come through here.
I don't think it's far-fetched. I think first...
JoJo even. I forgot him. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I was even thinking about the limited time that Annunen has spent with Parkala. And if you look at the rink piece this week, there's a little bit of a breakdown, but Jonas Johansson and Justus Annunen are the second best tandem in the AHL entirely. Yep. And the year that both of them are individually having is still among the league best, including Justus Annunen, who is still having an even better year than last year. It kind of snuck up on me. AJ made a comment too when he read the numbers that Justus Annunen's actually having a pretty terrific year in net, also playing behind a decimated Eagles team. Yep. So the trickle-down effect.
Same systems.
So that's what I wanted to start with, is the way Colorado executes defensively is complementary to goaltenders, I think is a fair thing to say.
Wow, that's a great way of putting it.
And then the second part of that is, Georgiev said earlier this season that some of how he's built relationships with guys this year has been defensemen coming to him and he said giving him tips. And I actually think that's sort of confirmation in ways that the conversations they're likely having is related to systems. And they're probably explaining how they execute defensively to Georgiev in anticipation of things like you're predicting here. That's why I don't think it's so far-fetched, because Georgiev said as much that he's having these types of conversations with players, and it's helped also to team build as well, to grow closer, to grow more trust between each other. And so I don't think it's far-fetched to suggest that might be why.
And it's just little things where it's like, hey, Georgie, if they're over here, we're trying to get them to move the puck up the wall and we want to only leave this option open, right? Because that's what scheme defenses are in the NHL. It's about trying to influence the puck where you want it to go. The old Wayne Gretzky line, don't skate to where the puck is, skate to where it's going to be. That's kind of the most boiled down version of defensive systems in the NHL. We are trying to get you to put the puck where we want it to be, because that's where we have the most coverage. That's where we've got sticks. That's where we've got whatever. Obviously, hockey's an extremely fluid game and things don't always work that way. But it's so funny. Like, we'll make the comment sometimes, or, they'll break up. The Avs will break up an attempted zone entry and they'll curl and they'll move it right back up ice. And we'll kind of like joke to each other like, wow, that worked exactly how it's supposed to. Quinnipiac runs a set play off the face-off the other night in overtime to win the NCAA National Championship. Doesn't always go that way, but there's an example of where, yes, that's the way it's supposed to happen. So it makes me wonder, is that something that is UC Parklow working more with the coaches, special teams, and scheme kind of conversations? So it's okay. I know if the puck's over here, this is what we want our guys looking out for, because we're trying to influence that puck over here, because that's where Val can get a stick on it, whatever. But if that puck's swinging this way, he's got to be ready for that. And again, obviously this is all very vague terminology here, but it is at that point where you bring in Annunen, you talk about Johansson, and then all these other guys that we've already mentioned, they're all really seeming to excel, and they're all fitting really well into this defensive system. Hearing them say they're talking to other guys about tips and, he's going here. We see Cale Makar talks a lot with the goaltenders during a game. He's always kind of keeping them involved. So, I don't know. Maybe it's crazy. Maybe there's something to it. But either way, you can't discount what UC Parkala has done for the Avs in the goaltending department. I mean, he's really enabled them to do stuff like this Georgiev move where it's, hey, you don't have to shell out 5x5 for Darcy Kemper, 5.5x5 for Darcy Kemper, because we are confident that this is another guy, cheaper, costs less, or doesn't cost much to acquire, and we think we can get the same results out of him because of A, what we've seen in him, and B, we trust our coaching, and C, we trust our systems. So it's really given them a bit of flexibility on this roster that other teams just don't have. You've seen what Edmonton is maybe better primed to win the Stanley Cup than ever. They've got a passable top pairing. Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl having unbelievable seasons. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins having a good year. Zach Hyman having a great year, and all of that could get undone in 4 games because of what they've got in net. And while that's true technically of anybody, my point is Edmonton paid a lot to put themselves in that situation. They're now kind of stuck with their goaltending tandem, and they don't know how it's going to go. The Avs aren't in that boat. The Avs aren't in that same situation as a lot of these other Stanley Cup contending teams, where it's we either have to pay a lot for a goaltender, we have to develop one, we have to draft one really high. The Avs are saying, we've got this combination of things that give us anybody. Just really kind of give us anyone that we think has a high ceiling, and we'll get them there.
I like that you finished that bit about trust in systems, trust in coaching, because I think the other part is a little bit that speaks to who Georgiev is. And this will be the last bit. We'll wrap up Georgiev.
I was just checking time, yeah.
But the fact that he requests a trade, changes his agent to quickly facilitate this trade because it's not getting done quickly enough for his liking, speaks to a belief in himself and trust in himself. Because this was after season by season worse numbers that were gradually getting worse each year. He still believed in himself. He still believed that he was to be a starting goaltender, and he just saw that it wasn't going to happen in New York. And I think the trust that he has in himself has been true here in Colorado too. Yeah. I think he has stayed even keeled through some of these rough patches and has continued to be what I would describe as consistent and trusted. I just feel a comfort in him in high danger situations, not even just literally, but also figuratively, like in overtime
high pressure,
period.
Yeah.
Exactly. In overtime periods, things like that, late in games, off D-zone faceoffs. There are just so many situations that I've grown to trust Georgiev in. And I think his trust in himself is just a quality in him that he is a really reserved guy. We're not really going to know his personality a ton, but I think he's been a delightful contribution to this group for who he is as a person too. I think that he's been a really good presence because he's pretty calm. We have seen him get emotional once in a game, but he also is hungry for it. He's been hungry for the games to be the starter, and that's captured in how he talks about how he's handling this workload. It is more than he's ever seen before, but he's excited by it.
Well, and then so this will be my last thing on it, and we can move on. But again, you spurred a thought. The trust and the belief in himself. It also speaks to he's an interesting guy.
He is.
We were talking about this the other day. He's an interesting guy and very quiet, very reserved. To the point where I made the comment to you where he had that game, I believe it was against Pittsburgh, where his helmet came off. And he actually had it just the other night as well. And I said, it's so funny to see him out there because when we talk to him in the locker room, whether it be casually or on the record, he's just a very kind of quiet to himself guy. He's got the thing where he reads a book a week. He's just kind of he's a funny dude. And I think you can forget that he's such an intense competitor as well. And I think the point that you make about, look, a lot of players want to be in New York. I get it, especially if you're living there 8 months out of the year. That's not like your permanent home. I can see the appeal to New York City. Young people, tons of money, in really the perfect scenario to be living in New York City. Alexander Georgiev could have said, I can be the 2A to Igor Shesterkin for the next 10 years, 5 years, whatever, 7 years. I can make a decent paycheck. I can live in New York City, in Manhattan, play at MSG, know that there will be stretches where Igor gets hurt and I'll get to be the number one guy for a few years or for a few games, for a few weeks, whatever. And that'll be great. It'll be awesome. Do you know how easy it would be for him to have done that and just said, yeah, I want to be here and I want to be Igor's number 2. We're both, we have a great relationship. We speak the same language or whatever. And he said, no, I can be that. I want to go. I want to play every night. I want the net. I want to leave my mark on a team. And I just think that always, that says something. I told someone yesterday at Easter dinner, I said, it's been fascinating, especially being back in the locker room regularly this year. We spend a lot of time in there, especially the practice facility, morning skate, things like that. And I said, just being around people that are at this level, that are, this high in whatever industry it is, right? They're at the top. We spend our time around the fraction of the top 1% of hockey players. And I was telling someone just to watch the way they train, the way they prepare, the way they are mentally, the way they take care of themselves, and just their approach. And he's one of them that I think it's just fascinating to watch, and it's so fun, and I'm so grateful because, again, it's so hard for regular people to get yourself there, that it's like, yeah, like you made it. You're in the NHL. You're playing for an Original Six franchise. You're making a ton of money. It would be so easy for the average person to be like, yeah, I'm fine with this. I'm fine with this role. There's not as much pressure, not as much as expected of me, but I still get every bit of the experience and, whatever. And I think it just really says something about him that he said, no, I want to switch my agent because I want to get out of here and I need a good situation. And he was willing to bet on himself. And thus far, it's paying off. And it's just, he's a fascinating one to watch for several reasons. But I think a lot of what we kind of have talked about here in the last couple of minutes is why I think he's, one, been a great fit and will continue to be a great fit for this team. And two, it's been a pleasure to get to kind of be around him this year for all of these reasons. And I hope that we get to continue, kind of having this relationship with him.
Definitely. He's a delight in there. He's easy to talk to. There's a kindness about him when you ask questions that I really appreciate as a newer person to being in that position this year. And then in looking at smashing records, there's been a lot that have honestly been broken this year. I think with Georgiev, it was franchise record for road wins. Honestly, that's a topic for a whole other day, is how good this team has played on the road. As a whole.
Going back to last playoffs.
Right. Because that kind of surrounding, before we were looking at Central Division title, like, can they win the West? We were looking at, well, do they even need home ice?
Right.
They're really good on the road. So it's been fascinating to watch that conversation change as the Avs have collected points. And part of how they've been able to collect some of these points has been through their star talent. And that's Mikko Rantanen and Nathan MacKinnon. And they both achieve a few milestones, truthfully. I mean, they're only the second team in the league right now to have to have more than one 100-point player, basically. We were just hoping Nathan MacKinnon would get there. And then almost immediately, and we should have seen it coming, Mikko Rantanen was right there.
Yeah. Well, it was that last home game before the 4-game California trip. And RF from Mile High Sports leaned down the road and he goes, he needs 8 points in 7 games. He can do it. Talking about Mikko to get to 100. And I remember being like, yeah, he could. That's a tall order, though. Like, that's a lot of points. in these games where you're gonna kind of be coasting, in some of these last couple ones, I was like, I don't know. And then, I mean, it just, in the blink of an eye, he was at 98. And it's like, oh, well, yeah, he's definitely going to do this. It's kind of been crazy.
I love, too, in the games that he's achieved each, both 50 goals and 100 points, they've been games where the course of them hasn't always been good.
Yeah.
And you're like, we don't want to waste this milestone.
Yeah.
We want this to be good for Mikko Rantanen. Mm-hmm. And they both were.
Yeah.
So I think that is a testament to the Colorado Avalanche, too, also not wanting to waste these games on behalf of Mikko. But it's also important to note Nathan MacKinnon hitting 100, now well above it.
Yeah.
Because I think that what they've managed to do this season has been in part because of what they're able to do together.
Yeah.
And I was looking at how much they've contributed to one another this season. And basically, Rantanen has been involved with 13 of MacKinnon's goals, and MacKinnon has been involved with 19 of Rantanen's goals. And
really, those numbers seem small. That's shocking.
Together, though, they've also combined on 11 additional goals that were scored by others. So for of goals scored by Avalanche this season, 43 have been because of something Mikko Rantanen and Nathan MacKinnon did together in some way.
Okay, yeah. Huh.
So
wow,
43,
that's an interesting stat. Yeah.
43, interesting.
Yeah.
It does feel like it should be larger also, is what I thought when I was counting. But
yeah, I was going to say, but when you lump it all together, 43.
43, those two together have contributed a pretty fair share of goals then. And obviously what they've been able to do individually, because Nathan MacKinnon has missed some time. So the fact that he hit 100 was impressive.
Yes.
But Mikko Rantanen has dressed for all games. And so he has been, I almost want to break it apart too, to talk about what individually they've been, but especially Mikko Rantanen, because you talk about him in the At the Rink piece, and it's interesting what he's blossomed into, because he has always had this high skill upside through seasons that has been observable. In the past, it's been a question of consistency, and then as far as emerging as a voice in the leadership group, that's not entirely new, but the way in which he had to take the reins on that this season, because he is one of the only healthy players, Landeskog's absence has been tough on this team. He not only leads through what he does on the ice in terms of production, but that's definitely a part of it, but through his passion. It's not so different from Cogliano and what we've seen, where it does boil over at times onto the ice, but I just think it's interesting how much Mikko Rantanen has matured in just this season.
100%, Megan. That's when I've done, whether it be radio hits, just talking to folks around the league, people coming into town, other media people, or just friends asking about what do you think about the season, whatever. That's always one of the things that I say first is I just can't believe that we've seen the type of step from Mikko Rantanen that we have. I think, they win the Stanley Cup last year. He was good in the playoff. Well, he actually really struggled through some of those playoffs. But, he produced. He showed up when you needed him to, things like that. I think really kind of coming into this season, a lot of people were like, yeah, we know who Mikko Rantanen is. He's a very good, to your point, high skill, elite level player, who can really control the game when he wants to. And he somehow found a way to take a step from that, where he's a leader in the room. I think one of the other question marks you get with him a lot was engagement. Is he engaged in the way that you need him to be, the way you want him to be? Things like that. To me, there is no question on if Mikko Rantanen is engaged this year. And the one thing that I've talked about a lot is he's using his gigantic frame better than he ever has. He's engaging physicality, whether it be when the puck's on his stick, in on the forecheck. He's not out saying he's banging bodies and finishing every check, but he is using his physicality in a way that he never has before. That's one thing that's frustrated so many people about Mikko Rantanen is he doesn't always play like he knows he's 6'4". I think he looks like he knows he's 6'4" this year, and it's just. It's amazing to see, and it's a great reminder that even at this level, even when it seems like these players have reached the pinnacle, they've reached their best, there can be another gear that they have. Mikko Rantanen entering into the true heart of his prime right now, And I think he took another step. And I think he's kind of showing like, yeah, I'm a 50 goal scorer. And I can do it again. You know, obviously he'll have to go out and do it again. But he's showing like, this isn't just a flash in the pan for me. I've hovered around this type of goal scoring ability. I've unlocked the next level. I know how to do this now. And again, I said it in the pregame when he was sitting at 49. I said, I think he can push for the record. This is how this stuff goes. He tries and tries and tries. And then as soon as it breaks through, Mikko Rantanen is good enough. Like, he is an elite enough goal scorer. I wanted it so bad because what I actually said on that pregame was, watch him do it and then rattle off back-to-back hat tricks. And he came up one goal shy of actually doing that last night. But, you know, now he's sitting here at the record. One more goal puts him in sole possession of the Avalanche organization record for most goals in a season at 55. He'd be breaking Joe Sakic's all-time best. This, to me, is a statement season for Mikko more than anything else.
I think, too, because you look at what league-wide records are out there, and it's heavily skewed by things that Wayne Gretzky has done, Alex Ovechkin has done, Connor McDavid has done. But when you look just inside the Avs organization, because I think there's something exciting about what the Avs are building and how competitive they're going to be moving forward. And the fact that even in a year where there's been a lot of concern over injury, you have two Avalanche skaters, the second pair to do it since Forsberg and Sakic emerge as 100-point players. And that's not nothing.
Right. Well, it's a lot of milestones, not broken. Well, yeah, broken from this era that you're talking about, where it's the first duo. Let me see. It's the first teammate duo to both have more than 100 points, Mikko and Nate, since Sakic and Forsberg. It's the first 50 goal scorer since Milan Hajduk. Nathan MacKinnon was the first 100-point getter since Joe Sakic. Like, there's been so many conversations now in the last, let's go back to the President's Trophy year. I've had so many people. Oh, do you think this team is better than the 01 team? Oh, how do you think this team compares to some of those, glory days teams? And even when they win the cup last year, there's all the, kind of the old school media guys and old school fans having how would they stack up to the 01 team? Could they beat the 01 team? And, there's kind of just been all this comparing of eras. And like, now you're starting to see this team kind of settle in to this era of being a contender. You win, you win the President's Trophy. You've got Central Division titles starting to stack. Now you win the Stanley Cup. And we're getting into the territory now, Megan, where it almost feels like that was the 96 Cup. Because now you've got your 50 goal scorers. You've got your 100-point getters. And it's like, oh. So now we can really start to draw the parallels. Not just, wow, what a strong team, but here are the superstars that are emerging. Here's the elite goal scorer that's emerging. Here's this dynamic duo that is really becoming like perennial. And it's really fun to watch because the line is really starting to be blurred between the glory days, 90s, early 2000s team, and are we sure this isn't the Avs team now?
And what's happening present day?
And by the way, all of that, I didn't even mention Cale Makar.
When I was talking about like who's contributed on McKinnon's goals, Rantanen's, Cale Makar's name's everywhere.
Right.
He's all over this.
Right. And that's the crazier part is, we're starting to draw these parallels from this team to, you're potentially looking at, well, it was always the Hall of Famers. The number of Hall of Famers were the calling cards in those early teams. Nate, Cale, I think if they both retired today, already have Hall of Fame arguments. Mikko is probably trending in that direction. Gabe, probably trending in that direction. Like, suddenly you've got, Bowen Byram, very, very, very early in his career, could end up on that, trajectory. Suddenly, all those hallmarks that you had of those early teams are all present on this current team. This team has a Stanley Cup. It's really exciting. I told someone the other night, for me, last year's Avs team became the Avs team. More so than the 01, more so than the 96. And I know there's going to be some old school Avs fans that are all going to, he doesn't know. I watched every one of those games starting. My one of our earliest memories, like as a family in Colorado, is me running around with a vacuum hose attachment, acting like it's a hockey stick after the 96 Cup. Like, I remember those early teams very well. Last year's Avs team is the Avs team for me now, and I think it's only getting better. And it starts with seeing how they have their own version of Joe and Peter. They have their own Milan Hajduk. They have their own, Ray Bourque, Rob Blake, whichever defenseman it is you want to pick that you want to compare Cale Makar to. Then they've got the secondary defenseman in Devon Taves, and they've got the young guy coming, and it's just, this is such an exciting group right now, and I think it's all made more real when you start see them actually knocking off those milestones from those early teams, because it's like, yeah, not only does it feel like they're as good, they're now writing their own history that they are as good or better.
I think it's parallels that are drawn with full respect. It's a high honor to draw comparisons to 100%. That era of Avalanche hockey. Yeah. And I think it's to pay respect to what the Avs are doing in present day, because you talk about last year's team, we all have been all season. Mm-hmm. And I bring this up a lot, that we view this year's team through a lens of loss at times, because this year's group is not last year's group. Right. The loss of Burakovsky and Kadri was hard on this team, and it wasn't really replaced in one singular way. Right. That's been difficult on them. But this year's Nathan MacKinnon isn't last year's Nathan MacKinnon either. And this year's Mikko Rantanen isn't last year's Rantanen. They're better. And those are the important parts to consider in the ways in which this year's group is different. You have an Alexander Georgiev, you have an Arturi Lehkonen, and Ivana Chushkin, who is just as good as ever, even in spite of all of the injuries. I think these are the things that keep what is special about this year's group special to this year, separate from last year, but important to build upon, because they're building upon themselves too. This is Nathan MacKinnon taking another step forward, because his ability to change or have impact on important moments in games when he's needed most is a quality that I think is shown through how he performs in the playoffs. We're seeing it in these games here at the end of this stretch too, because he is highly competitive. That's not new to Nathan MacKinnon, but he's definitely being activated right now. You can see the playoff hunger, because I'll say it, the start of the LA game and the start of the Anaheim and parts of the Anaheim, I should say, game, hunger wasn't there. Yeah. But you could see the way in which it is activated, like a switch is flipped, and it is something impressive that I personally just don't want to forget about moving forward.
There was a moment last night where I knew that had happened. Do you know what it was?
Which one was it for you?
It was a look on his face after he tied the game. They put the camera to him, and he just had this like, that was annoying that we had to go out and do that, but it's tied now. Now we'll just win. And he hammered that one-timer. And I told my parents right before, now again, Anaheim was just handing them power plays. That was like some of the worst game management I've ever seen in my life.
It was weird and favored the Avs.
Well, but and this isn't what this is about, but like none of those I thought were like soft calls.
Like made up. Yeah, right. Entirely out of nothing.
Right. I was like, that's just like, what are you, like if you're Anaheim, what are you doing?
So there was a running joke, like Max Jones specifically had money in his locker after the game because he was paid to throw the game. Like, obviously a joke.
But the Avs got the one goal and they started to buzz. And I told my parents, because there was a couple face-offs where Nate and Mikko were going around to everybody and like talking to everyone on the ice. And I said, Anaheim's fucked. I said, these guys they got that goal. They dialed it up a level. Jared's rolling them like every other shift right now, and they are buzzing. And I mean, Nate got all of that shot, hammered that puck, and they put a close-up on his face, and he did. It was like told you.
I knew I was going to do that.
I told you that we were going to score and tie this game. And I was like, if I'm any other team watching this game, whether it be for film or if I'm the Ducks, it's gulp like shit. This dude is dialed in right now. We talked about how he dragged the Avs kicking and screaming through that second round series in the bubble and almost got a Michael Hutchinson-backed Avalanche team into the Western Conference Final. To your point, this isn't last year's team, but with the way that Nate and Mikko are playing right now, if the Avs can get any semblance of healthy, I'm absolutely terrified if I'm in the Western Conference.
They're supercharged versions of what they were last year. And I like the moment you call out because I think it starts with Rantanen's goal. Mm-hmm. I think that's when they said, oh, yeah, this is possible.
Yep.
But then I think the moment, too, is how, because they're playing hard after that 2 draw, these 2 penalties that after that second one, I think that's when they knew.
Yep.
The timeout is called and they said, we are absolutely scoring on this power play.
Yep.
But not we. Nathan MacKinnon specifically said, I am absolutely scoring on this power play. And that is not a quality, respectfully, that many players have. Respectfully, he's a freak. In that way, there are so few competitors like that. However, one that comes to mind is Connor McDavid.
Yep.
Who hit 150. I didn't want to go the whole pod talking about 100-point players without making mention of what Connor McDavid is.
No, it's been really special to watch this year. You know, I've had the running joke all season that I'm just done picking the Oilers to be successful because the management has mishandled that roster in so many ways. The fact that last year Connor McDavid getting blown out of the Western Conference Final is the most competitive games we've ever seen him play in is a disappointment. Like, the league has to be disappointed in how the Edmonton Oilers have run a Connor McDavid led team. That all being said, he has, I really do think, put that team into a different level of contention this year by himself. I mean, what he's doing is unbelievable. It's just automatic. It's gotten to the point where like his point production is almost even boring because you know it's 2 or 3 every single night. Every single night, it's 2 points, 3 points, 2 goals and an assist. It's whatever. Like, you've almost even stopped keeping track of it because you just know it's going to be coming with such regularity. He's not done. Right. And it's been unbelievable to watch. Again, we heard all growing up, you and I are about the same age. We've heard from our parents and the generation right ahead of us, oh, you guys didn't get to see, pick your name, right? Yager, Gretzky, Lemieux, whoever. And that's true. We got like the very tail end of those careers. Like, I remember Wayne Gretzky as a Ranger, in terms of like live hockey. And it's just really fun because Meghan, we are getting this generation's version of all of those guys. And respectfully, and I know people wince when I say this, but like, in my opinion, we're getting supercharged versions of all those players because the training is better. There's more practicing. There's more emphasis on coaching. Guys take care of their bodies. The technology's better. The equipment's better. Like, whatever caveat you need to feel good about the glory days from when you were growing up, when I'm talking to this, sure. It's just so fun because watching Connor McDavid put up 150 points in the era of Andrei Vasilevsky, Igor Shesterkin, Ilya Sorokin, Connor Hellebuck, UC Saros, Jake Ottinger, watching him do that against this era of goaltender, not to mention the level of defense and the schemes that teams play and the systems, and they watch hours of video keying in on stopping Connor McDavid, and it just doesn't matter. He just keeps racking up the points. It's been incredible to watch. We're very lucky that we get to exist in this era of Connor McDavid, and really the league is extremely fortunate to have him doing what he's doing, and it's been really fun to watch. And he makes 127 points for Leon Draisaitl a footnote. That's how special it's been.
I think it's a great way to wind down the show too, as a preview to what the Avs have to look forward to in this Edmonton matchup, because we have our supercharged MacKinnon and Rantanen on one side, but we have an Edmonton team that has a McDavid, Draisaitl, and a Nugent Hopkins having 100-point seasons. That is also not nothing. They obviously have their own shortcomings, but Connor McDavid by himself individually is so special. And we talk about breaking records. He is going to break goals scored and assists scored from any active player currently in the league this season. And it's not a feat you wouldn't have guessed he could accomplish either, but this is going to be playoff caliber hockey that we're seeing, I'm assuming. Are you expecting that for the Edmonton game?
And see, this is one where, again, we talked about it last year in the Western Conference Finals. And, Nate downplayed the 100-point thing. But as that has been the theme of this show, he's an unbelievable competitor. He knows he's staring down 150 points on the other side. I think he would be the first person to give all the credit in the world to Connor McDavid and saying, I'm not Connor McDavid. I'm not putting up 150 points. But, that Nate wants to go out and have a good game and be like, 150 points? Yeah, no big deal. We smoked him.
He loves best on best.
He loves best on best. And he really thrives in those moments. And that's what I think that we're going to see at bare minimum out of those top guys. R.E. Edmonton, what still just makes me nervous on that team's behalf. You're talking about a playoff series. I think they still have huge question marks on defense.
Definitely.
And they have massive question marks in net. No one is questioning their ability to put the puck in the net. Can they keep it out of their own for long enough? It almost cost them a first-round series last year. They kind of fell backwards into the Western Conference Final, and then they just couldn't stop the bleeding, and they couldn't outscore a true contending team. I think that could still be their problem this year, but Connor McDavid, I think, is going to do everything in his power to kick that trend. And at 150 whatever points, he's going to have a chance to do it.
I'm looking forward to that and the games slated for this week. There are a lot of battles, I guess, in the standings happening this week.
Such a good slate of games this week. I'm really excited.
So we'll be keeping an eye on that. We'll have content coming your way. But that does it for this week's At the Rink podcast, DNVR Avalanche. I'm Meghan Angley, Jesse Montano. We'll see you next week.